Mental Testing and Intelligence Theory, A Brief History. Dr. Michael Botwin, California State University, Fresno. However, it's our brief history introduction. So, let's begin. I wonder how many times a day the woman answers the question, where do I go to take the intelligence test? Well, if I don't see you in the next room, I'm going to wonder just where I'll see you next time. Before we talk about the history of tests, let's just talk a little bit about what tests are and are not. So what are tests? This is very simplistic, but tests can represent these three categories, and these are probably the three biggest categories of testing. As a personality psychologist, I see tests as a sample of someone's behavior, typically their trait behavior. Most often these can be reports of behaviors. For example, if I were to ask you to respond to an item from an extroversion scale, I may ask you, how frequently do you go to parties? How frequently do you interact with other people? And have you respond on a Likert scale that would go from never doing those things to always doing those things. A second major use of psychological testing is diagnostic value. Not being a clinical psychologist, I can't give you the ins and outs of diagnostic testing, although it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Basically, the goal here is to give a test to diagnose some kind of condition, whether it's some kind of behavioral malady or maybe even a neurological one. Now, the third use of test is predictive validity. Can the results of the test predict future behavior or performance on a task? Many of you have already completed the SAT. The SAT is a test that has predictive value. It is supposed to predict who will do well in college. Many of you who are nearing graduation may be taking the graduate record exam. The graduate record exam has the same goal, to have predictive value to predict who will do well in graduate school. Now, despite the fact testing is widespread, I'm a firm believer, like most other individuals who dabble in testing, that a test is only one piece of evidence in terms of using information to diagnose or predict an individual, and that other information should be used as well, so you get a multi-method, multimodal form of assessment. Let's go back and look at the first known use of testing in a systematic way. And to do that, we need to go to very ancient China. Now, the Chinese civil service were the first individuals to promote the use of testing on human record. And the primary use of the civil service test by Chinese government officials was to keep aristocratic families from dominating government positions through favoritism or nepotism. And the individuals at the time thought that if they could come up with a fair way of assessing people, they would get better civil servants in the imperial government of China. The second point is they wanted to allow for fair treatment of individuals, so everyone has the same shot at performing well or poorly on the test. The examinations could be backbreaking. The most simplest low-level examinations could last 24 hours. The test for the highest bureaucratic positions in China, the mandarins, could last 3 days. In the highest levels of testing, individuals were placed in isolated rooms to provide intense testing experiences and also a private experience. At the highest levels of administrations of civil service tests in China, the exams were actually copied by other individuals so that handwriting would not be a factor in the selection of candidates. There were 3 levels of local exams in the Chinese civil service, and at the lowest level, local exams consisted of knowledge of classic Chinese literature, poetry, and the ability to write calligraphy. Now remember, this was way before any kind of printing press was even thought of, so having individuals in the bureaucracy who could copy important documents was extremely important. If you passed the local exam, you got an entry-level position in the Chinese civil service as an accountant, or maybe an information retainer, as they were called. At the provincial level, exams became more intense. Testing focused on knowledge of the classics, especially those related to Confucius and his thinking. If you successfully passed the provincial level examination, you received the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. The Chinese name for someone who has passed the second level of service is a juran, or a recommended man. The highest level of service in the Chinese government was the national examinations. Now, all 3 of these are progressive, so you could only complete the national examination after you've completed your provincial training. The exams consisted of knowledge of military affairs and taxation, revenue balance, and an even more extreme knowledge of the classics. These exams were taken in private rooms, and the results were transcribed by other individuals so that handwriting was not a factor in the selection of a candidate. If you successfully completed the examination at the provincial level, you could be qualified for positions within the imperial court or other such extremely prestigious positions. Very few individuals, several out of 20,000, successfully completed the 3rd level of Chinese civil service.